With all that said, I know a lot of people are asking me, Patricia, what took you so long to make this video? It's been 2 years since you hinted about doing an episode on Arnold's Christmas. What happened? Well, here's my explanation. Back in November 2016, when I had just finished writing my script for the History of Hey Arnold the Jungle movie, I had gotten started on writing the first drafts of the script. However, I felt that there was something missing. I wanted to know about the makings of this episode. How did Steve Viksten come up with the idea of writing this amazing Christmas classic? I had re-listened to my interview podcast with Joe and Sullivan back in 2014, where he briefly mentions about the story.
It's a very important memory to me. Like, I have a personal thing about that episode. So what happened with me on that one was that Steve and I went to Chinese dinner, and Steve said, before you leave, can you just help me crack this Christmas episode? And I said to him, I don't know, I don't really, what have you got? And he kind of pitched me this Secret Santa thing. And he said, I just don't know what else to do with it. But he had this other story that he'd been trying to tell, this Vietnam story, for a long time. And I said, well, is there something else that you could do? Like, isn't there something more interesting than just the Secret Santa thing? Could it lead to something else, like with one of the other borders? And kind of together, I can't remember which one of us said it, but I think I said it, actually, but I said, what if it was Mr. Wynn and your little Vietnam story you've been trying to do? And he tries to get his daughter back. And Steve had this look in his eye, and it was a combination of, like, mischievousness, which I think he had. Like, on the one hand, he thought, oh, that would be amazing. And on the other hand, he thought, you think they'll let me do it? And he actually said, Nickelodeon will never let me do that. And I said, well, I don't know if they will or not, but if you did, it would be the first animated show that I know of to go to Vietnam, and the only Christmas special I've ever heard of. And so it's funny because he gave me like a story by credit on it, which I don't really think I deserved, because both of them were his stories, I just said, why don't you put them together, But the thing is, how that happened where, Nickelodeon, they kind of, at that point, they weren't paying that much attention, which is weird, and they didn't want to, when they figured out that he was doing a Christmas episode that would go cut to Vietnam, they really didn't want him to do it. And Steve did one of these things, and this is, I think, where Steve and I started to, where we ended up having our fights, is that Steve did this thing where he was trying to be secretive, and he wrote a script without the Vietnam stuff in it, I think. I never heard the actual story of how this happened exactly, but I heard this one part that makes sense this way. So, by the time Nickelodeon realized there was a Vietnam flashback, it was already an animatic, right? So they could change it if they wanted to, but they were going to lose some money. So there was this executive named, I forget her name,
Mary.
Catherine something. Not Mary Harrington. She was working for Mary. Her name was Catherine something, and she had been an executive years before, like at the studios, and she was just like, this was kind of her retirement gig,
Oh, okay.
But anyway, so she took the episode home. Steve told me this story later. She said she took the episode home, and she showed it to her. She had it up, and she was just watching it. They were kind of like, are we going to fire this Viksten guy? That's what it was like,
Mm.
And she had it up, and her son was watching it, her little, 10-year-old son. And at the commercial break, the son turned to her and said, Mom, is that what Vietnam was all about? And she just called up, and said, okay, it's approved, go. So, Steve did a lot of things through trickery, like writing scripts that didn't have scenes in and then putting them in later and stuff like that, to get these things passed through the system that nobody wanted, Those are some of the best things he did.
So, after listening that bit, I decided to look up the Hey Arnold credits and had found the name of that supervising producer, Catherine Seitz. I had contacted her requesting to answer questions about that very subject, but she and her son were very busy at the time. She was giving writing workshops, and her son Alex worked for CNN and was busy covering the presidential elections with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. So I waited until January 2017, where I finally got a hold of her. She had talked about her fond memories on working on Hey Arnold and how amazing the episode of the Christmas special really was when they saw the final product. However, the story that Joe told me that Steve told him wasn't ringing a bell for her. She didn't recall Steve being close to fired by the producers, even though he did turn in his script very late. When she told Alex about his memories of watching the Hey Arnold Christmas special, he didn't recall reacting to the Vietnam War scenes. I had appreciated her time and tried looking for other people who may have remembered that moment. I had messaged many people who worked on Hey Arnold, including Craig Bartlett himself, and came to the very same conclusion. The story that Joe told me was that when they first came up with the Christmas special, they were having dinner at a Chinese restaurant, and Steve had these two ideas in which it amalgamated to a Secret Santa, and the story of the Vietnam War. And from what Joe told me, that from what Steve told him, when he pitched the Christmas special over to, everybody and the producers, they didn't like it. They thought it was too controversial, and the producers wanted to fire Steve. And so there was this one person that, was taking the tape of the animatic, and she was watching it, and apparently her son was watching it as well, saying like, "Mom, is that how Vietnam was like?" I got a hold of her, and she told me that she has no recollection of that. And then she told her son, and he says that he has no recollection on that either. And Joe told me that Steve has had a reputation of kind of like making stuff up to make himself look good. I'm just wondering, have you ever heard of anything like that?
Well, it's weird. I talked to Joe about it since then, and I don't remember that. And here's what's wrong with that idea. I can picture him saying, I want to do a story about Vietnam to Catherine, and her saying, "What? No, that doesn't sound like a good idea for a Christmas special." But from idea, that moment, to an animatic, that's like months and months of like writing a bunch of drafts, getting it through a bunch of network approval, handing it out to be drawn, doing all the storyboards, editing it into an animatic, and then showing it to them. That's way different. So it's not like suddenly she had a look at an animatic. So that can't be true. That couldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And they didn't say they were going to fire him either. If he originally said he was going to get fired for having an idea they didn't like, that doesn't make any sense.
Then I listened deep into Joe's interview and found something that I had overlooked.
It's funny, too. I think where I get mad at Steve looking back is that he took credit for things that we did together or I did by myself, that was part of the thing. And that kind of stuff bugs me, but I know that he was really sick for a long time, and he needed to do that, That's what I get upset with him. And I think when you guys are talking about him, I get upset about it sometimes with him because I feel like, come on, Steve, you didn't need to do that. There are things like, there's an episode where Grandma is trying to move a piano.
The List. Yes, I also love that episode. That was a great episode.
That was completely my episode. He had nothing to do with it. And I wrote that song, and I sang that song, and I wrote all the lyrics, and I went into the next office. It was the middle of the night, and Steve was in there, and I said, "Hey, Steve, can I sing this to you? What do you think?" I want it to be like an old 1930s Tin Pan Alley song that would have been written in the Depression. And Steve said, "I love that," and he did give me some lines. And we sat down, and what if you change this line to that? What if you change this line to that? And we played it. And we sang it over into the tape recorder, and we sent it over to Jim Lang, and Jim Lang loved it. He changed it a little bit too, It's all got changed a little bit. But in that book of that Matthew wrote, Steve said, "I wrote that song," and I was like, "No, you didn't, Steve." But he was at that point he was very sick, and he was living up in Sacramento, and an alcoholic, and just in a sad way. So I've kind of forgiven him, but sometimes I just worry about that he's going to, the mythology of Steve take over the world, He was, one of my closest friends for so long, and I've just always been like, why would you have to do that, Steve,
I reread Slimed and found Steve's quotes talking about all of his accomplishments, even though he didn't fully do it by himself. Remembering that, I had concluded that it was possible that Steve was lying about the story Joe told him. Even though that I had reached a dead end on what really happened during the production of the Christmas episode, there was something else I got from it. But that is for another time.